to my heart because of what Jeff Wells, and what Bill Moore, and what, Carlisle, and what Joey, and what Marty and Ann and everyone did in terms of painting and, helping with that. So I'll send over some money for that.
Thank you, Lorna. Well, if there's no others, our Vice President in charge of programs is
Hey,
Lori
Jim.
Harrison. Yes.
I just wanted to offer kudos to the folks at Botanical Garden because Michael Desplaines has done a wonderful job, and that garden has been a respite for so many folks, particularly in our community and throughout the city. And I just want to thank Michael for being so open for bringing the community together in a place that we find so much solace. So thanks again, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Any others? Okay. Well, thank you. So as I said, our Vice President in charge of programs is Lori Harrison. And I'm going to now turn it over and she'll introduce our Rotarian of the day, and we will go on with the rest of our program. Sergeant of Arms is Marilyn Gowan for today's meeting. So Lori, all yours.
Thank you. I want to thank Lisa Chandler for being our Rotarian of the day and introducing our speaker. A little bit about Lisa. She has been a Rotarian for 15 years as of this month. And some of her favorite things about Rotary is that she enjoys the service projects and the camaraderie with the different members. And something you may not know about Lisa is that she loves Disney and Pixar and animated movies and can't wait for her grandchildren to grow up so she can watch it with them. So thank you very much, Lisa. Take it away.
Thank you. And actually, I said that I can't wait for my grandchildren to be of an age where I'll make them watch them with me. So, that's what I'm looking forward to. And by the way, Lori, I already watched Sing and I loved it. So, but it is my pleasure to introduce Lisa Kersey. It's been a long time since I've been in a meeting. We have Lisa Kersey, we have Lisa Barnes, and we have Lisa Chandler on here. So you are surrounded by Lisas, and that doesn't happen very often, but it is a good thing for today. Lisa is the Executive Director of Virginia Beach of the Virginia Beach Justice Initiative. And prior to stepping into the role, she served on the board and as a volunteer for nearly 3 years. Her passion to stop human trafficking began 10 years ago when she started providing financial support for children impacted by trafficking in third world countries. She continued to look for ways to make a difference closer to home, and that's when she discovered Virginia Beach Justice Initiative. She is a graduate of the University of Virginia and holds a master's degree in healthcare administration from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her career has included leadership positions in strategic planning, development, and communications. She is a Virginia native and currently lives with her husband in northern Suffolk. And when she's not working or volunteering, she enjoys hiking, kayaking, reading, watching college basketball, drinking good wine, yes, Lisa, and spending time with family and friends. And also joining her today is Stephanie Birch. Also with the Virginia Beach Justice Initiative, and she is a retired career police officer with the city of Suffolk, who now works part-time with VBJI. She has served in many roles with the organization, including advocacy coordinator and development director. Stephanie is a gifted and practice speaker and instructor, and she is leading VBJI's training events for law enforcement and others along the criminal justice continuum. And I now turn it over to Lisa Kersey and Stephanie Birch. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for that introduction. We are grateful to be here, and in talking with Jim and Lori, we learned that you all have attracted many international speakers during this lockdown. So we feel very honored to be among some of the local voices that get to share some time with you. Let me just share my screen. All right. All right, is everybody seeing the home screen of human trafficking presentation? Great, great, thank you. Just as we get started, I just wanted to mention, if you have questions or things that you think about along the way, feel free to post those in the chat box. Stephanie's going to be monitoring that throughout the presentation. And then if there are any other questions, certainly at the end, we can also answer those. Just thought that'd be the easiest way to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions on that? Okay. All right. Let me move this over here. All right, we're going to start with a quiz just because we can, right? But there'll be no grading today. So I just want to start out with a few things to get you thinking about human trafficking, and then we'll dive in a little deeper. True or false, traffickers target victims they do not know? Many people think that that's true. Many people have seen movies like Taken and think a lot of kidnapping and of strangers. But the reality is that, especially in the United States, many people are trafficked by people that they know, boyfriends, it can be a spouse, and it can even be a parent. Parents do traffic their children, and that's not just something, sadly, that happens. It's sad if it happens anywhere, but it does happen right here in our community as well. All right, second quiz question for you today. Human trafficking involves moving people across state and national borders. It's interesting because the term trafficking certainly does suggest movement, and most people think that that is true, and that can be true. But the reality is you don't have to move out of your own home, and you could be trafficked within your own home. And we're going to talk in a minute about the definition of trafficking. All right, last question for this morning is, trafficking victims are physically unable to leave and are locked or held against their will. Again, some of that is Hollywood, but it does happen. I won't say it does not happen, but most are not physically restrained, particularly in our country. They're mostly, the chains that they experience are mental and emotional chains, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about something called grooming that traffickers do to really keep their victims where they want them and make them afraid to leave or filled with enough shame and guilt that they sort of hold themselves there, if you will. So I want to show you a short video before we dive in a little deeper. I had an issue with it once this morning. I hope I don't have to go out and come back in on you. But I might. Sorry about that. We did test it yesterday. Jim and Laura can attest that it worked.
Did work yesterday.
It's not wanting to work today. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time on that for sure. So we'll just move beyond it. And we'll cover most of what was in there. It's and I can send you guys the link to that video and to the presentation if you want to see more. It was that particular video was done by the Department of Justice, their Office of Victim Crimes, and it really provides just a 3-minute nice overview of trafficking in the U.S. And speaks to many of the things we're going to talk about today. So, what is human trafficking? There is actually a federal definition. And that says that to be human trafficked, there must be force, fraud, or coercion involved. Force is probably what most people think of. That's kind of an obvious one. Fraud is more where somebody maybe lures somebody on false pretenses. And again, that doesn't have to be from other places. Somebody could be looking for a job, especially in a crisis mode like the current pandemic we're in. Somebody says, oh, I've got a job I can put you in, and you show up to meet them wherever, and that's not at all what they have in mind for you. So luring people by false pretenses is a form of fraud, and that could be one way somebody's trafficked. And then the last one is coercion. And coercion is a little more nuanced, and that's, again, you heard me mention grooming, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but it's where a trafficker uses manipulation and really ends up creating an atmosphere or a climate of fear around a person, causing them to do something that they don't really want to do. So again, to be human trafficked by the federal definition includes one or more of those things. And at BBJI, we work with human trafficking victims. There are both, you can be labor trafficked or sex trafficked or both. Our focus is on sex trafficking victims. We also work with what are called commercially sexually exploited people. So those people, in a simplified way, they're abused similarly. They just don't meet the definition of human trafficking. So it's not force, fraud, or coercion. But an example would be somebody who is, has some vulnerabilities, has some desperation, has some need for money or drugs or a place to live, basic needs like food, and they will exchange sex for those things. Also pornography and other taped, online filming and things like that are forms, can be forms of either CSE or human trafficking. So people ask a lot, like, well, where do they find their victims? How do they do this? If they're people, again, I said that they know them, so they're not necessarily unknown to them, but they don't have to be directly known. It may or may not be a boyfriend, but it might be somebody in my circle. So traffickers will look often in their own neighborhoods or in neighborhoods that they know have more vulnerable populations in them. They target schools and group homes. They're looking for groups of, what children, if we remember our teenage years, are not experiencing vulnerability. And if they're in a group home, then the traffickers know that they're kids who have been through something already. So they know that they're gonna have a soft spot. They're gonna have something they might be able to exploit. They also go into clubs and bars. I'm guessing that's a little less so during the pandemic, but it really seems to not have disrupted the flow of trafficking, unfortunately. But they will look there. And also, of course, on internet and social media. That's a big place for it. They can, they look for adults and kids that way. It's not just one or the other. And that's a significant way that people buy and sell human beings in our country. So how do they lure them exactly? So when I talked about some of the grooming and the manipulation, again, you can see the things on this page. Sometimes it's out of protection if somebody's experiencing abuse at home and they run away, for example. Somebody says, oh my goodness, that's terrible, I'll protect you. And so under the guise of protection, they'll take them in and then start to, provide them with food and the basics, and then basically turn that on them and say, okay, now you need to do something for me. Sometimes they just exploit other people's dreams once they've gotten to know them. And so this idea of opportunity, I have a friend who's in the music business, or I have a friend who's in the modeling business. I can help you get in. And then that's not what they do. And then there's just the oldest one in the book, right, of love. We all long to have love and to be accepted and to belong. And so people who are looking for that, whether they be children or adults, can fall prey to traffickers on that premise. So here's a little bit more about grooming. Essentially, it's a period that starts with initial overtures that seem positive. Sometimes you can see warning signs if all of a sudden somebody's being showered with gifts or has more expensive things than they've ever had before. And then, like I said, sort of that idea of selling the dream. I find out what drives you, what you want to do, what you want to be, and I tell you I can help you get there. They just learn as much as they can about you so that they can find out what makes you tick and where your insecurities are. And then over time, they flip that and they start to use those things against you. They are interested in controlling it. You know, you see here identity and individuality. It's basically a stripping of the humanity of that person over time. So they start with things like they'll give them a new name to use. They will brand them. Branding in trafficking world really means usually a tattoo of some sort. It can be the pimp's name. It can be a $ in the middle of a heart. It can be a barcode. We've seen a lot of things, but they put that on these women because they see them not as women, but as, and men, I shouldn't say that, men are certainly exploited as well, but to mark them, if you will, as their property. Interestingly, sometimes in the nuances of what happens in the trafficking world, if a pimp has several women that are together, sometimes the woman has been so emotionally abused that she sees the tattoo as a sign that she belongs, that she's in, and they'll use it in that way, versus realizing that it's a mark on her, that it is not about her at all or about her belonging. It's about the pimp, the person who has the control. They also literally can confiscate their identity documents, so a license, a social security card, which makes it harder for them to run and harder for them to move on from what they call the life. So the single biggest common denominator in trafficking victims is vulnerability. A lot of people ask, about race or socioeconomics. They think that it's just runaways or it's, already marginalized people in society. And while all of that can be true, this is what they're looking for, is vulnerability. So they don't care so much what form it comes in as long as they can figure out what it is and exploit it. So how big is the problem? We get asked this a lot, and spoiler alert, we don't really know. And the reason we don't know is because of the nature of the crime. It's very difficult to prove that case. The people who are victimized by it are afraid to come forward, often for a very long period of time. And many of them don't even realize for a while that they are victims, which is why with our program, we offer a jail-based program where we go in and teach a class in the jails. And that's where many times women realize for the first time that they've actually been victimized. They don't come in thinking they're a victim at all. So it's hard to know. There's no nationally representative sample, again, because of that, but there have been a lot of regional and local around the country studies done. And so there are some areas that we have more information about than others. So globally, it's a $150 billion industry, and that includes both labor and sex trafficking. And then you see on the right, 2/3 of that is attributable directly to sex trafficking. And one of the things that drives that is, unlike drugs or arms trafficking, those things, I have a commodity and I sell it and it's gone and I have to replenish. With sex trafficking and even labor trafficking, if I have a person, I can use that person over and over and over again, and nobody's running after me for that person. So that's part of what drives that, the fact that that's 2/3 of the money involved. A lot of people ask too in our country, where is it happening the most? And people assume New York often as the top, or even Georgia, Texas. Texas certainly hits the top 3. So I like to show people what the top 3 are so that and some of the other states that we frequently get asked about. But we are in the top 20. Virginia is in the top 20, and that is based on the Polaris Project, which runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is kind of the best marker that we have to get a sense of where it's happening and how frequently it's happening. And this is based on the number of reported cases. So again, all the experts in the industry will tell you, we know it's underreported, but we're still in the top 20, and that doesn't make me feel very good. Why is that? Well, partly because a lot of victims go unidentified. They're just, as the saying goes, kind of hiding in plain sight. It's assumed that people who are prostitutes that they've made a choice to do that with their life. And because they're arrested for crimes related to their abuse and they end up in and out of jail, they're labeled as a criminal. So that's how everybody is seeing them. And so they miss it altogether that these people are actually victims of a crime. Other times they can be misidentified because sometimes people have an addiction and that's what because something else has happened in their life and that's what gets them into trafficking. Other times they've never used anything in their life, but to cope with the abuse and the trauma, they become addicted. And so substance abuse becomes an issue, and somewhere along the line, maybe somebody tries to help them with their substance abuse, but doesn't realize there's an underlying trauma that needs to be dealt with as well. And you can see several of the other things on the list too. Not that any of these are surfacey issues, but it still masks the underlying problem that they've been a victim of human trafficking. So let's talk a little bit more locally. Again, it's difficult to say. What you see on the left side of your screen on the white is the Hampton Roads Human Trafficking Task Force numbers. They measure their work based on the number of investigations and arrests that they've made, and certainly also the number of confirmed victims. Those were the 2018 numbers. But you can see on the right-hand side, this is just our organization last year. We identified 51 new victims, mostly through our jail program. We provided 115 of those survivors with court support. And what that means is we show up at sentencing hearings. We help to advocate really help the courts, all those involved, probation officers, Commonwealth's attorneys, public defenders, judges, to see the victim side of the story so that we can help get them sentenced to programs if that's appropriate for them versus just continuing to cycle through the jail system. And then we served a total of 126 survivors. Many of our partners in the community are some of the historically domestic violence shelters and homeless shelters who have started to expand to accommodate human trafficking victims. And sometimes they show up there first, and then they realize that there's something more there, and we get involved to help deal with the human trafficking side of the story. So let's talk a little bit about business and industry. Since this is a Rotary group, I thought I would hone in on just 4 areas. There are more, but I thought this covered a lot of territory. Some of you may or may not know some of these things, and like I said, there may be others, so feel free in the chat box or at the end to share your own experiences or knowledge on this. But healthcare, that's kind of part of my background. And it's healthcare is one of the few opportunities that somebody who's been victimized by trafficking has to get out. So if they end up with a sexually transmitted disease, or they are really badly hurt by a buyer or by their pimp that causes them to have to go to the hospital, to the emergency room, that is one opportunity, if we educate our health systems, where they would have an opportunity to get out. And there are several that were in the process of training. A few have already gone through that training. It is primarily in the emergency room or in the urgent care centers where you would see that. But we teach them the signs to look for, both what the trafficker is going to act like and look like, and things that they can incorporate into their intake. Just a few simple questions to ask that will help them determine if somebody's being trafficked. A couple of those things, besides the obvious physical pieces, are if they don't seem to know where they are, they can't give you a home address, and things like that. Though their traffickers do teach them to lie quite a bit, so they can get very crafty. But healthcare is an area where we do like to educate people so that they have a chance to get out. On the commercial real estate side, I've talked to several of my friends who work in that industry in our community, and that's a big one where it looks like a legitimate business, but something's happening behind the scenes. You hear on the news a lot in our area, but also more around the country, these examples of massage parlors or other places like that people are not so sure about. And we tend to, kind of not want to get involved sometimes, I think, when we see things because we think maybe we're not seeing it right, or we don't want to assume. But the reality is we really do need to be doing that. And so we're trying to educate the whole commercial real estate industry here locally to let them know and consider working with them on putting something in the documents when somebody signs a new lease about just a, a simple thing that explains it, what to look for. And if you see it, kind of let us know or call the authorities, that kind of thing. Because it's important that the more people who know and are seeing things can help call attention to it and help us to break up some of those rings that are happening. The third area is transportation and hotel industry. So traffickers can move people around. Like I said, people can be trafficked in their own home. They can be trafficked around our region, up and down the East Coast, across the country. And so all of these different modes of transportation can be part of a trafficking victim's journey. And so it's something that we want people who work in those industries to be aware of and what they can look for. But it even comes down to, private driving services like, the black car companies, Ubers, Lyfts, taxis. Those get used a lot. And sometimes the pimp will pay certain ones off to cart people around, to have them look the other way, that kind of thing. Hotels, that's where a lot of the victims are abused, is in hotels. We had one client we worked with when we took her to a treatment program, and they were showing her around and showing her room. She said, "I'm so glad the sheets aren't white, because that reminds me of being in a hotel." So hotels can, it can be happening there and they not know it. Many hotels, including the Marriott, has taken a huge made a huge investment in educating all of their employees worldwide about the issue to try to be part of the solution to that. So again, all of these that I'm talking about have the potential to be not part of the problem, but part of what traffickers use, but they also have an opportunity to be part of the solution, which is kind of exciting. The last one is finance and banking. You've heard the phrase, follow the money, find the crime, and that is absolutely true. So Jim, when we talked yesterday, said he had had some recent training on that too, so he could probably share a little bit more in detail with you. But the reality is that they do, have a lot of that money flowing through the banks, and the banks have to be savvy in the finance industry about who's banking with them and what's coming in and where it's coming from. On the flip side of that, for our clients, when they come out of the life and they're trying to rebuild their life and overcome barriers related to having a criminal record and having trauma and having their identity stolen, they're trying to establish, what you and I have. So going into banks and just opening a bank account and being able to do that is a struggle. And so there are many things that banks can do to actually be on the side of helping those who have survived human trafficking to kind of reestablish their life. So I just wanted to, like I said, share with you a few examples in business and industry, how traffickers are using it and how those industries can help be part of the solution to end trafficking. So just a little bit more about who we are before we jump to questions. We are a local 501c3. We are focused at this point in our history solely on our region and really helping to end human trafficking in Hampton Roads. I meant to mention, as Lisa was introducing us, it just kind of solidified the point. We have an interesting name in Virginia Beach Justice Initiative, and our former executive director and co-founder did that when we first started because he was working a lot out of the area trying to connect with other human trafficking organizations around the country and working on legislation and things like that, and felt like Virginia Beach was the most recognizable for most people out of our area. For us, we feel like it's very limiting. In fact, our office isn't even in Virginia Beach, it's in Hampton. And it's a long name and it's hard to say. So we are actually currently in the process of going through a name change. We're working with actually one of my former colleagues who's an expert in the branding world, and we're very thankful they're doing it pro bono for us. So we're going through that. So we will keep you guys posted as some of our new friends about that name change, so you don't get confused if you go to look for us and we're not there anymore. We will be, we're just going to have a different name. So the three main things we do as an organization are in front of you there. Really, I mean, it is about the more people who know, the more people who can help end trafficking in our region. The outreach isn't just awareness like these sorts of presentations, but as mentioned in Stephanie's introduction, we do a lot of training, industry-specific training in healthcare for law enforcement and for others, where we go a little bit more in depth and help them learn things and have tools that they can apply to their work, because those are people who the clients that we work with are likely to come in contact with sometime in the course of things. And the more of those people who know and can see them as a victim first, the more likely they are to get out of the life sooner and stop cycling through the system. Prevention education, we partner with another nonprofit that has specialized in putting together a curriculum to go into the middle schools and high schools. And so we have a group of volunteer ambassadors who are trying to get that into, or at least introduce it to all the schools here and let them have the opportunity to integrate it to their curriculum. So if anybody on this call has an in to one of the schools or wants to talk more about that, feel free to reach out to me. And then lastly, and the biggest part of the work we do is the direct survivor support. So working directly with survivors through crisis and stabilization services, helping them to transition back to a life of freedom. This is kind of what it looks like if you just wanted a quick overview of, high-level overview of that journey from slavery to freedom for one of our clients. You can see on the left, the whiter boxes, that's kind of where we live, is in crisis and stabilization. And then we have a number of community partners that we work with in collaboration, and we continue to co-advocate for our clients as they move through transition and independence. So if you are interested in getting involved, there are many ways, as you can see here, whether it's being a general volunteer or deciding that you might want to be somebody who walks alongside of these women as they're recovering and helps to be a coach and a mentor to them. We have a victim advocacy training that we do for that. And we have 2 annual events, so you can see those opportunities there. These are some key dates for this year. Again, if victim advocacy is something you think you might want to do, these are all volunteers that we train in a 6-week course to walk alongside these women. And that's coming up in September, October. Obviously this year it will mostly be virtual training. This is us, and this is how you can reach us. So that's it. I'm going to stop talking and see what Stephanie has seen come in on the chat box, and let Jim kind of facilitate how he'd like to open it up to questions.
Sure. Lisa, thank you very much. It's obviously a very important issue, not only on a global basis, but also here in our community. What questions do we have for Lisa? Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away.
How has the pandemic changed? Have you seen an increase in trafficking, or I didn't know how it would affect it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's affected in a couple ways, and a couple ways we think are going to be coming that we don't know yet. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. So the most immediate way it impacted us was that, as I mentioned, we work with a lot of women while they're incarcerated for crimes related to their abuse. And they realize that they've been victimized. And then we usually go through a process. We know when their sentencing hearing is, we know when they're going to be released. We work with them to do a whole pre-release plan, and they smoothly transition back into the community or into a treatment program. With the pandemic, the jails needed to go on lockdown because they needed to reduce the number of people in the jails so that they could, minimize the spread of the virus. And what that caused to happen was that many of our clients fall in that category of they're not a high risk to society. And if they were towards the end of their sentence, then many of them were let out. And it was like we found out, like the week before, which isn't usually enough time to do that. So we had kind of this outpouring of clients that we're trying to help support and stabilize. And there's really nowhere for them to go either, because then the programs went on lockdown. Because all the shelters and all of, whether it was short term or longer term, those went on lockdown as everybody was wrestling to figure out, okay, how does COVID affect us and how do we keep everybody safe? And so everybody was sort of in this holding pattern. And then that creates the vulnerability that I was talking about earlier, which could cause some, and some did, default back to their trafficker because they didn't feel like they had anywhere else to go. And so we try to really up our game in terms of working with our volunteers and volunteer victim advocates to take them food, to refer them to some of the food bank and things that were opening up, to bring them. We had to try to really hard to source, all the supplies that we all had trouble finding, toilet paper and sanitizer and all that stuff, and get that to the clients so that they at least all their basic needs were met, which we hoped would at least minimize that part of their vulnerability. But where we would normally then keep moving them along to job training or something like that, we all know that that's kind of up in the air right now for so many people. And when you have a criminal record and you're trying to find a place to live or get a job, you have those extra barriers. So it's been an intense time, and we've really seen a complete flip of the number of clients we're serving. So normally we have, most of them are incarcerated while we work with them. They come out at a reasonable tick, and then we can help the next round that comes out. But we had all of them come out. So we all of a sudden flipped the number that was in prison to the number that were in the community that we were trying to keep up with and serve. And then we've actually, I don't know how we've managed this. I think after the first month when programs are figuring it out, we have usually about 15% of our clients that we do help get into long-term treatment programs. And that's great. So that we have been able to start that back up, but that's how it's impacted us and our clients.
I have a question for you.
Okay. And Stephanie, feel free to chime in too.
I have recently come to know one of my neighbors is involved in a group called Survivor Ventures, and I couldn't see your chart clearly about the various phases of helping people that have been, but she's in the getting them settled when they're finally getting their own, place to live, etc. And she posted on Nextdoor that anybody that had any household goods could drop them off at, her garage here in West End. And that's my favorite donation place now, because she takes anything that we don't need in the house, but somebody might need if they're just setting it up. And I presume you're familiar with, because I think Survivor Ventures has a board that brings people together from the region.
Yeah, Survivor Ventures is one of our partners. Are you talking about Tiffany?
Yes, Tiffany. Yeah,
Yeah.
She lives 2 blocks away from me, and I only recently on Nextdoor saw her invitation to donate things, and now she's my favorite go-to place for donation.
That's fabulous. Thank you for donating. Yeah, they've been a great partner for getting, helping to get clients into jobs and making sure that the employer kind of they are fully aware of who these clients are and what their background has been, and just trying to match up needs of employers with the needs of our clients, and then also getting them housing. So yeah, that's big. I didn't mention that earlier either. On the commercial real estate and also the residential real estate side, one of the things that Survivor Ventures and some of our other partners do is partner with some of the residential companies in the area who are helping us because there's just a dearth of safe places for these women, and that's one of the biggest needs. And so we do have, housing in that regard. Back to Lori's question, in the pandemic, one of the things we did with Survivor Ventures was we ended up working with an Airbnb for a long-term thing to be able to have a safe place for clients to go. So we had to get creative with that. We try really hard not to put them back in hotels because of what I mentioned earlier, but sometimes we still need to do that.
I
If this
think we
was
have time
covered
for one more
earlier,
question. Go ahead.
if this was covered earlier, I apologize, I was a little tardy. You've mentioned on a couple of occasions walk beside these women. Are there male victims?
Yeah, good question. There are. We are right now, historically, we've worked mostly with women. We actually do have one male client that we're working with right now. We really need to either find a partner who can build up more male support to come alongside of some of the men who have been trafficked. There's some literature out there I was reading recently about men and boys being kind of the forgotten ones in this particular struggle, because they are just seen so differently culturally. Everybody child who's abused or that kind of thing is, there's shame that comes with that, and they tend not to tell people. But boys in particular are afraid to say something. They're afraid of how they'll be perceived or whatever. And so they end up living with that for a while until they go into adulthood. So it can happen to them there. But there is more work being done. There are some organizations out there that are trying to come more around men and boys and systemically really start to ask some of the same questions they ask younger girls or early adult girls. They're starting to try to ask the boys and men because they're not being recognized as victims of crime, but they absolutely are trafficked as well.
Lisa, thank you very much for your presentation. And Stephanie, thank you for helping. I think you were in the background giving a wealth of information in addition to what Lisa was doing for us. One of the things that we do to thank you for coming and presenting to our group is, rather than give you a coffee mug, which lots of other clubs give out, we donate a book in your honor to our School of the Week. So this week, a book will be going to Blair Middle School in your honor. If you're ever there and when they're open, you can check it out, and the book will be there. Again, thank you very much for joining us. It's certainly an issue that we all need to be made more aware of. Our next meeting, folks, will be next week, the 21st of July, and Ross Wood will be speaking to us. He is a Rotary Peace Fellow. So I think we've had him a long time ago. We had him at a meeting, but he really did a great job of speaking about some of the things that are going on as a Rotary Peace Fellow throughout the world. I do want to bring up one last thing. If you miss seeing somebody, a fellow Rotarian at this meeting, please reach out to them and let them know that we're having good speakers, that we're learning things, that we're trying to engage each other and in the community. And if one of those people you think might need some technology coaching, let us know, and we'll be happy to make that as simple as possible. But thank you all for joining. We'll see you all next week, and thank you especially to Lisa and Stephanie. We appreciate it, and
We enjoyed
we
it.
are adjourned.
Thank you.